Building a brand can be challenging, but that's because everyone just goes about their merry way without answering some very crucial questions. Defining a brand and putting some guidelines in place is very crucial before you get hustling on creating content, reaching out to people, yada yada. Hello and welcome to this episode of Design Hustle, where we'll talk about how you can define the essence of your brand and some strategies to keep in mind while doing the same. So diving right into the thick of things, while your logo and brand identity do matter and add to that visual recall, it is very important to make sure the essence and the story driving all of that is also packed with a punch. Otherwise, all that brand recall and that effort that you've put in building it just goes for a toss. Here's how you can approach the full scope of branding. Up ahead, we'll also talk about the 5C strategy that we use to close clients and that you can take advantage of to define a strategy for your brand. Before that though, start with identifying brand depth by defining the direction, the audience, and the positioning. Basically, the idea is to craft a very purpose-driven identity. Only then will you be able to connect with your target market more profoundly. There will be subsequent videos where we talk explicitly about all of this, or depending on when you're watching, a few months down the line from when this particular video is published, it's probably there in the playlist already. But a strong brand strategy trumps aesthetics. Every touch point is a chance for you to leverage visuals, words, and interactions to create meaningful brand connections. There are so many ways to reach out to people, whether it's YouTube where you're consuming this content, newsletters, other social media platforms like Instagram or beyond. Maybe there's a question of how can you maintain that consistency across all these different aspects, and we'll come to that. But before that, think about the story itself that backs the brand like I talked earlier. For example, with Design Crescendo, the entire purpose behind why we are making this kind of content is so that we can genuinely help creators in this space build a brand, close clients and projects, and give back to the community everything that we have learned in the last 10 years doing all the things that we have done. I'm going to try my level best to make sure all the content I create revolves around this purpose to help as many people as possible kickstart their freelance journey, kickstart their creative journey. And if the story and the backing is legit, then undoubtedly the more you're on their minds just makes for a greater chance for you to grow your brand in general. If you keep these two things in mind, one about building a strong narrative, two, about hinging it a lot more on emotion, you will be able to build your brand much faster and make it much stronger. So we've seen some subjective components about how you can go about defining your brand. Now let's talk about a couple objective things with respect to how you can create a brand design system for yourself, which turns out to be a very critical component in the journey of building your brand. By the way, if you found this content useful, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. This will help us continue making more such content like this. Moving on towards the importance of a brand system. So the reason why I just want to spend a little bit of time and talk about this is mainly because to some extent in the first third of this video, if I can put it that way, we saw to a large extent the subjective components that build a brand. Now, when we try and approach the objective angles of it as well, we can take a more holistic approach in terms of defining some very critical things in place so that when we make the story run across all these different platforms that we talked about or other ways to reach out people, it holds true, it stays consistent, and does the job of actually pushing the story forward. Approaching brand building via this two-pronged approach is very critical precisely for this reason. Creating these guidelines are very important not only for consistency but also to reduce the number of mistakes. Basically try and make creation easier and more seamless. So to create a unified and cohesive brand identity, these are some attributes to take note of. One, with respect to the design system. And now I'm going to quickly run through this and also show you a couple examples of very famous companies and organizations and what kind of brand identity guidelines they keep in place to ensure these things. So with respect to the design systems in particular, logo, how exactly are you supposed to use it? What are the do's and don'ts around it? Can you use it on a dark color? Can you use it on a light color? What is the kind of alignment that's possible in relationship with other logos on that particular collateral, for example? What are the colors that work for your brand? What are the secondaries and tertiaries that you can use? Call out exact hex codes so that nobody can make a mistake with these. Fonts. What is the hierarchy? What are the two typefaces that you want to use in connection with each other? What exactly are the layouts and the types of sizes you want to incorporate for different components, probably for your website or your social media content? What are the elements that your brand takes forward with respect to the design system? The shapes, the illustration, the artwork style. How does it work from a photography perspective, the lighting and the composition? Is this a playful brand that will work with bright colors, or is this a very dark brand, a grunge kind of vibe that appeals to a specific set of people that requires that kind of harsh lighting? What is the packaging like? What are the descriptors and the templates that are used for this kind of stuff? And really quickly, let's have a look at a couple guidelines like I mentioned earlier. One, Spotify. And see very clearly how their guidelines talk about how their logo can be used, right? In terms of different components, where exactly it can fly, the icon itself, how it would work on different colors, the exclusion zone, a lot of very critical pinpointed information with respect to the usage of the logo. The misuse, can you rotate the text? Can you put a gradient on it? Can you change the color? Stuff like that. Some of it may seem very obvious, some of it may not, but the point is to call out every single thing so that nobody makes a mistake with respect to how it's supposed to be used. A little bit about the fonts as well, when you can use it, what is the typeface exactly, all the information that you want to know called out very clearly. And I'll link all these guidelines in the description box, but I can tell you it's not very hard to find. A very simple Google search will help you find any company's brand guidelines to draw inspiration from. Another one here is Barbican, for example. Bold and confident word mark is what they're going for. So as you can see, they call out Futura as the main font that they're going to use for all their stuff, the kind of colors, the vibe that they're going for. I guess because it needs that pop, being part of the drinks category in general, and all that information in terms of the crops, the spacing, where exactly it is used, all very clearly called out as I skim through this really quickly to show you some examples of the same, right? So yeah, that's a little bit with respect to the design systems. Now let's talk about the language system section that kind of fits into the brand guidelines in general. Here we're talking about the tone, the style and personality with which you want to communicate your content. What are the emotions that you're going for? The vocabulary, what kind of words will push that emotion forward depending on your target audience. Is it simple language that you want to use, something slightly more hi-fi just in case you want to appeal to a more educated background, for example? Keeping in mind all those aspects then extends into, say, the phrasing, the kind of slogans, the taglines, the hashtags that you want to take advantage of for your social media content, and then the copy itself, right? When you're building your brand across multiple platforms and aspects, which would even include SEO for that matter, then how exactly do you go about writing your articles, your captions, the scripts for your videos and stuff like that? And if you are a solopreneur or a very small business, while this may not feel very critical to define at the very beginning, trust me, at some point, the more you start putting in the effort at the beginning to define these, the more cohesive your entire approach for everything going forward would be. It'll become easier for you to then talk to clients in general in terms of putting your pitch decks together to present stuff to them, how exactly you're going to put your mail together, how exactly you're going to put your content out there, so that it has a more consistent vibe across all the platforms, right? So extending that same thought process even down to the scripts, if at all it's a mid-sized company or a larger company, how exactly are the sales executives calling and pushing the product or the service forward? What exactly is their tone? How do they talk? All this is called out in the language systems, including the descriptions as talked about earlier. So let's have a look at a couple examples really quickly of the same. One with respect to Asana. So really quickly, a bunch of stuff that's there over here is something that we've already seen with the other stuff as well. But coming down in terms of how they define their identity from a language perspective, right? Over here, in terms of the main phrase, what they're going for, what are the main key words that define their brand and their tone, all very clearly called out. Another example of this is, say, with Alienware and what exactly they are going for with respect to the voice in their piece, right? The kind of audience they want to cater to and the tone very clearly called out with respect to how they want to take things forward. And then finally, we have the third component of the brand identity system in general, the value systems. Here we're talking about the narrative. So this we've briefly discussed as the first component at the very beginning with respect to defining your story. But just kind of knowing that very clearly is what lends itself into the rest of the components, right? The framework, the classic stuff like your mission, your vision, your belief, and all these other components that you want to define for yourself. Through this is where the rest of it stems out from. Ideally, this should have been the first system that I should have been talking about among the three, but you get the drift. The culture, the processes with respect to how tasks are done internally, what kind of hiring setup is there, the positioning with respect to the UVP, how exactly you're looking to sell the product, or even yourself if you're a freelancer for that matter. And then of course other pieces that kind of put the jigsaw puzzle in place with respect to the services and the emotion, right? So really quickly, let me show you how exactly MailChimp goes about this. And now again, voice and tone is more a component of the language systems itself. But the reason why I'm putting it over here is because it very clearly to some extent also calls out the value systems that define what kind of tone and language MailChimp wants to take forward, right? We are plain spoken, we are genuine, we are translators, our humor is dry. Up to that extent, very clearly called out what is the tone, how exactly do they want to speak when they talk to their customers, even in text, active voice, avoid slang, well of course. But you get the idea with respect to what level of detail it normally is called out in. And you can see within their guidelines itself, there are a bunch of things that they've given with respect to say even writing for social media, right? These are all the things to keep in mind, the guidelines, what kind of content works, witty, some objective stuff with respect to the length of the characters and different places where you want to write content, whether it's email newsletters, the guidelines to follow there, how exactly you can create very clear structured content based on this voice and tone, all very cleanly called out. So to close that loop really quickly, brand guidelines form a very robust foundation, right? And investing in this aspect, the objective angle of defining your brand becomes very important so that you've both thought about it from a subjective perspective with respect to the story and the emotion that it needs to hinge on, as well as the objective aspects that put it in place, that allow you to now start defining that story in a very clear manner with the visuals, with the text, with the tone, with the voice, with all of that in place. And now finally time to check out the 5C strategy that you can use to define your brand and to approach these components in a more clear structure. It's time to put your brand identity in place based on all the stuff that we've just discussed. 5C strategy itself basically talks about character, context, connection, cause, and campaign. Let's have a look at each of them one by one to better understand how you can use these components to build your brand, or to rather define your brand. First off, clarity through character. Try and probe as much as possible to define those classic statements that I talked about earlier with respect to the mission and the values. Basically, what you need to do over here is try and think of your brand as a character, right? What exactly does it stand for? What is its driving factor and its purpose? And the more you think of it as a character in general, the easier it becomes for you to define things around it. Now, if it's a personal brand or a solopreneur, then you are the character yourself. Think about why you're doing this. What is your driving factor in general? And that makes it way easier for you to start unearthing the company's essence to a large extent. There is a second character over here as well with respect to, say, the client or the customer or whoever you're trying to sell this proposition to. But we'll see a little bit more about that basically when we talk about connection. Next off, consideration for context. It's important to understand that you are part of a larger ecosystem that exists, right? And while you may be pushing a particular product or a particular service, there are so many others out there probably doing the same thing, or even if not, who are the other people that you can collaborate with to push this effort forward. So knowing the ecosystem in general, those who are collaborators that you can participate and take things forward with, and those who are competitors, to understand what exactly they are doing, what's working for them, what's not working for them, to draw a little bit of that inspiration, set that context, and then take the building of your brand forward. And now, cognizant connection. This is to a large extent about that second character that I briefly did a little bit of foreboding about earlier. But forge connections with your audience as much as possible and try and do some research, right? Figure out what their interests are, what are their problems, understand the values that kind of push a lot of their decision making forward. So we've seen character, we've seen context, and we've seen connection. Now about the calculated cause. Brand building isn't a short-term exercise or activity at all. This is a very long, drawn-out process, and putting the foundation right at the very beginning is super important because that's how you will be able to tread on and on the road forward for as long as it takes. So make sure you take into consideration a bunch of all these different strategic aspects that push this course forward. And now that we've seen all these aspects, we are equipped to build our brand. We know components about it that will help us define something really strong. It's time to commence the campaign. The idea is to prioritize budget, resource, and execute this roadmap in such a way that it translates into that actual impact that you want to make as a brand. Again, if you're a freelancer, if you're a solopreneur, is this something to be entirely worried about? Maybe not, especially in your early days. But the more you want to take things forward, when you want to evolve yourself and your brand from a freelancer to a consultant, that's when you start thinking about a few of these aspects. If you want to start kind of building a team a little bit and trying to make sure that you get more opportunities coming your way through the brand that you've built. So that was largely the 5 C's that I think would be very useful as a framework for you to define your brand. And like I said, once you've done this, you've built that subjective angle a little bit with respect to the story, the emotion, and what kind of content you want to create and take forward. Use the objective guidelines that you've put in place to make sure you're consistent. You build that trust with the audience and slowly build your brand. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe like I asked earlier. Cause if this added some value to your hustle, then only by the likes and shares and subscribes will it actually reach more people and help them with their hustles as well. Peace out. I'll see you in the next one.